Tonight, changing course.
Do not retaliate, and you will be rewarded.
The markets soar after President Trump pushes pause on new tariffs, but not for China.
The tariff on China will now go up to 125%.
And Republican revolt.
And then I'll see some rebel Republican, some guy that wants to grandstand.
Whose throat do I get to choke if this proves to be wrong?
I know what the hell I'm doing.
Battle lines form in the rank and file over the GOP budget. Plus, fair game.
It shouldn't be my goal to beat a biological male.
The expanding fight over transgender athletes in women's sports.
And public display of religion.
I think it would be good to have in the schools.
The drive to display the 10 Commandments in America's classrooms. All this and more tonight on Faith Nation. Reversing course on tariffs. Good evening, I'm Jenna Browder.
And from our Washington News Bureau, I'm John Jessup. Well, with the world facing an economic meltdown due to the Trump tariffs, the president shifted his position today, ordering a 90-day pause on the tariffs for all countries except for China.
Yeah, for China, the president upped tariffs to 125%. Taking a live look now at how stocks closed out on Wall Street, the Dow Jones up almost 8 percentage points. And you can see the spike there in green. That was around 120 when the president made the announcement.
Well, indeed, it has been a busy day with a lot of changes and a lot of moving parts.
Yeah, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, who's been with President Trump through all of these tariff talks, spoke with reporters at the White House today. CBN News senior White House correspondent Kelly Wright was there. Kelly?
Jenna and John, good evening to you. Before we get to Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, let's get to President Donald Trump because he spoke about the matter. He said that China showed a lack of respect to the United States and global markets, and because of that, he raised that tariff to 125%, putting that 90-day pause into effect. And while meeting with NASCAR racing drivers here at the White House on the South Lawn, he had this to say about why he was looking at the market and chose to do this. Watch this.
Well, I thought that people were jumping a little bit out of line. They were getting yippy, They were getting a little bit yippy, a little bit afraid, unlike these champions, because we have a big job to do. No other president would have done what I did. No other president. I know the presidents, they wouldn't have done it. And it had to be done. What was happening to us on trade, not only with, if you look at it, not only with China, but China was by far the biggest abuser in history, and others also. But somebody had to do it. They had to stop because it was not sustainable. Last year, China made $1 trillion off trade with the United States. That's not right. And now I've reversed it. It's for a short period of time, but we made $2 billion. We're making now $2 billion a day.
And the president believes that they will continue to make more here in America and get those jobs to America that he's been talking about with the American manufacturing going up and jobs going up, looking out for Main Street. But the bottom line here is that he announced a stunning development here today, and it has the stock market rising, but there's still issues out there dealing with China. Back to you.
Last night, Kelly, the president spoke to congressional Republicans at a dinner event last night talking about this subject. Can you give us a little bit of a sense of his message to both those in the audience and also for his base?
One would almost look at last night's speech to the NRCC, the National Republican Congressional Committee event that took place here in Washington, as almost like a tell of what was going to take place here today. And when we met with Secretary Scott Bessent of the Treasury, he had a lot to say about the changes that the president made, and here is what he stated today.
This was his strategy all along, and that, you might even say that he goaded China into a bad position. They responded. They have shown themselves to the world to be the bad actors.
And so here we are. This is going to continue. We do not know how China will retaliate, if they will at all, or if they'll come to the table to negotiate with the president. The president believes that China will come around and negotiate with him in good faith for reciprocal trade and a fair trade deal.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see if China comes around. Kelly, the administration is saying that 70 other countries are willing to negotiate with the president. Do we know if any of those negotiations have started?
Some of those negotiations are taking place. For example, Japan and other countries will be coming as well to the table to create some sort of trade deal with the United States, fair trade, fair reciprocal. So the president is feeling on top of the world right now, but there's still the question of what happens to Main Street in terms of how they will get the manufacturing jobs here to enhance the quality of life for all Americans economically.
All right, Kelly Wright at the White House. Kelly, thank you very much. And joining us now is Richard Stern. He is the Director of the Federal Budget and Economic Policy at the Heritage Foundation. Richard, welcome.
Thank you for having me on.
So let's start with your overall thoughts on what we saw today, Richard, from the Fed to now this pause on the Trump tariffs.
Oh, well, it's Liberation Day playing out exactly as we had talked about. Look, I think that, we've known for decades there have been trade abusers who block our exports, manipulate their currencies, use slave labor, forced labor, and all of these things that are not just violations of human dignity or their own people, but they're also harms committed to American workers and American families and communities. What you've seen here is that the president has taken a real step to use these tools, to use tariffs, as a way to bring these abusers to the table, to get them to really open up and negotiate to get rid of these trade abuses and work towards a world that truly has free and fair trade. And what you're seeing here is that first light through the tunnel of the success of this strategy. And of course, part of that is also securing our borders and all the other things that he's done over the last couple months. So I'm excited to see where we go from here.
You're talking a little bit about what he calls the reshoring renaissance and, of course, placing a premium on the American worker. But in the short term, we're seeing a market rebound. And, of course, we know the markets aren't the economy, but they do serve as an indicator. And what we've learned over the last couple of weeks is that markets and business owners don't like uncertainty. So what's the ultimate effect of this back and forth?
Well, I think one of the important things to your point on that is the stock market, I think, can best be thought of as a forward-looking crystal ball. Now, as the old joke goes, predictions are hard, especially about the future, and crystal balls even worse to use for that. So, the markets, to your point, they don't like uncertainty, but I think what you saw was a decline based on people not having a knowledge of what the strategy exactly was or where it was going to go, whether it be successful or not. So I think the fact that we've seen success, the fact that this has come incredibly quickly, of course, means that you're not going to have the stock market harms turn into real harms in the rest of the real economy. And of course, as people think that what's going to happen is a reduction in real global trade barriers, there's actually going to be more optimism for more real free trade that would improve industrial output everywhere across the planet. And, part of this is the broader suite of things the president's looking at: deregulation, tax cuts, DOGE, getting rid of duplicative and onerous government programs. And that's going to allow the more investment to flood into America. It'll make America, again, the most lucrative place to invest on.
Okay. Richard, we have to leave it there. We're out of time. Thank you so much for coming on this evening. Richard Stern with the Heritage Foundation. Thanks,
you. Thanks, Richard.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.
Well, over now to Congress tonight. House Speaker Mike Johnson looks to move forward on a Senate budget plan despite possibly not having the votes.
Now, the Senate passed its budget framework over the weekend. We'll see what happens in the House. CBN Capitol Hill correspondent Michelle London joins us now with the latest on that. London.
Well, Jenna, certain House Republicans today voiced why their chamber's vote is a critical step to advancing President Trump's big, beautiful bill. Texas Congressman Jody Arrington urged members to stick to the House-passed budget resolution or risk adding trillions to the national debt.
If we're going to usher in the golden age of America, we must advance a reconciliation bill that includes the entirety of President Trump's America First agenda, not just the tax cuts, not just dereg, not just American energy, but reining in runaway spending that threatens to bankrupt the United States of America.
Arrington argues that the Senate version doesn't include enough reductions in spending to offset extending tax cuts from the first Trump administration, which expire at the end of the year. Speaker Johnson can only afford to lose 3 GOP votes, and so far, as many as a dozen are questionable, including Arrington and Pennsylvania Rep. Lloyd Smucker, who have opposed the Senate resolution. Last night at a fundraiser for House Republicans, President Trump told those opposing the bill to close your eyes and get there. Speaker Johnson's pitch is that the House can still achieve historic spending reductions in the final bill. His goal is to get the final bill to the president's desk by Memorial Day. John, Jenna.
All right, Michelle London, thank you very much. Well, the fierce debate over transgender athletes and a fair playing field in women's sport. When we return, an inside look at how it's affecting students and their faith. Next.
Welcome back. A case about a Christian school's stand on transgender athletes may be on its way to the Supreme Court. Mid-Vermont Christian School argued in a New York federal appeals court today that being barred from state athletics for refusing to compete with a transgender athlete violates its religious freedom.
Yeah, and a similar debate is playing out in Maine. CBN's Tara Merchner has more on the fight over fairness and federal funds in women's sports.
Maine's small towns, rugged coastlines, and tight-knit communities create a peaceful scene. That quiet is being rocked, however, by the debate over who gets to compete in female sports. It's put Maine in the national spotlight over its state policy, caught between federal pressure and public opinion. Nestled in the state's northern tip, Presque Isle is known for its snowy winters and vast farmland. Now it's also home to one of the state's youngest voices, speaking out on the transgender sports debate.
It shouldn't be my goal to beat a biological male, but it was. And when I didn't, it was super defeating.
For high school senior Cassidy Carlisle, the issue is personal.
I believe that God has created spaces for women to flourish, and we need to protect those spaces.
As a varsity athlete in 3 sports, her first challenge came not on the field, but in a middle school locker room, where she had to change in front of a transgender student. The issue followed her into high school, where the junior faced a transgender athlete in Nordic skiing, an opponent who had previously outperformed several of Cassidy's friends in track.
He placed in like the bottom 15 or 20% when he competed against the males his freshman year in high school. And as he transitioned, he became one of the top female runners.
Males have natural and categorical advantages over females in terms of strength, speed, and power.
Cassidy is certainly not alone, as this transgender debate in women's sports spans from high school to the Olympics, raising critical questions about fairness in athletics.
There are, I think, 3,600 trophies have been lost. 6,000 top-tier finishes have been lost in 11,000 competitions.
So far, more than 24 states have passed laws or regulations restricting transgender girls and women from participating in sports inconsistent with their biological sex.
Now those laws are being challenged in court.
Transgender rights advocates, however, argue the playing field has never been level in women's sports.
I think it's irrelevant because we allow all kinds of competitive advantages within women's sport.
In February, President Trump weighed in by signing an executive order barring transgender athletes from girls' and women's sports. States refusing to comply risk losing federal funding.
The war on women's sports is over.
Days later, the focus moved to Maine when Governor Janet Mills publicly pushed back during a White House event.
Well, you better do it. You better do it because you're not going to get any federal funding at all if you don't. And
the Trump administration quickly moved to investigate Maine's compliance with Title IX, which prohibits discrimination based on sex. It concluded that the state violated the law by allowing biological males to compete in female sports. The controversy reignited when a transgender athlete from a Maine high school recently won the girls' pole vault event during a Class B state championship. The year before, when competing as a male, the individual tied for 5th in the same event and 10th at the indoor state championship. Adding gasoline to the firestorm, Maine's State House censured Republican Representative Laura Libby for identifying that student in a social media post.
The member will not be able to cast a vote or speak on the floor until the member has come back into compliance.
Libby then sued the House Speaker for violating her right to free speech.
It's mind-boggling that we're here discussing this and that this is not just a foregone conclusion that males are males, females are females, and males do not belong in female sports. It's basic biology.
In 2021, Maine changed its Human Rights Act to prohibit discrimination based on gender identity.
It's not about transgender sports. It's about who makes the laws and who enforces the laws.
They want our girls to be comfortable sharing a locker room with a biological male. They want our kids to have a different perspective than their parents' generation on the value, the beauty of gender and sexuality as God created us.
Republican Liz Caruso is sponsoring a bill that would ban transgender athletes from competing in female categories and require Maine schools to designate facilities based on biological sex.
Maine policy has been ignoring Title IX protections, and it has caused chaos and discrimination.
As the debate rages, polls show that 80% of Americans believe transgender athletes should not compete in women's sports.
Full of hope for the state of Maine that our voters, our communities, our parents, our churches are going to engage in a way that they never have before.
As for Cassidy, she's staying in this political competition, from rallying against the governor's transgender policies to attending a White House roundtable, followed by national news appearances.
You feel like you don't have a voice, but that's not true.
While she plans to step away soon from athletics to focus on college, Cassidy hopes her actions will help empower future generations.
Who's to know what opportunities could have come had this individual not been competing against us?
Experts say Maine's legal and legislative developments could shape transgender rights, both in sports and broader policies nationwide. In Portland, Maine, I'm Tara Mergener, CBN News.
Thank you, Tara. Up next, the movement to get the 10 Commandments posted in public schools and the legal fight that everyone is expecting to follow. Overseas tonight, another Israeli airstrike in Gaza. The Gaza Health Ministry says at least 23 people were killed.
That's right. The Hamas-run ministry says more than half of the dead were women and children. The strike hit a 4-story building in a neighborhood in Gaza City Center. Another 40 people were hurt, according to the health ministry. Israel says it struck a senior Hamas militant. Meanwhile, on Capitol Hill today, the U.S. Senate voted to confirm former Arkansas Governor Mike Huckabee as the ambassador to Israel. Huckabee is a born-again evangelical and a staunch supporter of Israel.
Well, back here at home, Republicans in more than a dozen states are trying to pass laws requiring the 10 Commandments be placed in school classrooms.
CBN's Paul Petit traveled to Texas, where the state Senate just passed one such bill.
Bless his food, bless his family. Thank you for the great message last night.
Adam Althouse believes his 16-year-old son Dylan and other Texas high school students would benefit from daily seeing the 10 Commandments in their classrooms.
They can look at it. They could say, maybe go home with their parents and say, what does this mean? What does, shall not covet thy neighbor's wife? What does that mean? So put the thought in their mind.
Texas is joining at least 14 states where legislators want to reintroduce Christian principles in public school spaces.
Posting the 10 Commandments in our public school classrooms allows students to have an understanding and an appreciation for our heritage, for systems of law, and the connection of the 10 Commandments to Western civilization.
Jonathan Sines, an attorney with the group Texas Values, helped draft the Texas bill.
We're confident with the recent election results that this is what voters want. They want to make sure that we preserve our values and that we teach about these things in our public schools, and we get back to basics.
Lawmakers in these states are also seeking to take advantage of the political shift and Supreme Court rulings, opening the door to more religious expression in schools.
God is mentioned in the Declaration of Independence. It's on our money, in music, like God Bless America. It's in our literature, and it's in the pledge to the flag. Why would we not mention God in our schools? The courts need to understand that by removing God, they are replacing it with nothing.
Opponents, including the ACLU and others, however, argue such measures violate the First Amendment.
This is clearly outrageous. This is not religious liberty. This is religious tyranny.
Louisiana became the first state to mandate displaying the 10 Commandments in classrooms. Freedom from Religion Foundation is among those challenging that law.
It's up to parents to indoctrinate or not their children or expose them to whatever so-called holy books they want or whatever edicts or mandates they think are true, but not for our public schools. So, of course, we're very alarmed at all the copycat legislation.
State legislators here in Texas believe their bill will stand up to scrutiny following a 2022 Supreme Court case that ruled a Washington State high school football coach had the right to pray on the field immediately after football games.
Only thing I even asked for from the very beginning was to be reinstated as a coach and to be able to pray on the 50-yard line. But the great part about it is it just took one person to stand up and said, enough is enough.
Coach Joe Kennedy believes the ruling in his favor has energized the fight for religious freedom in schools.
People are standing up. They're being bold in their faith. They're being bold in their constitutional rights as Americans.
It's basically a combination.
While Althouse wants Texas schools to prioritize academics, he also sees value in an exposure to biblical principles that have shaped Western civilization.
I think being there in the schools is important. I think it would be good to have in the schools.
If it's good enough for the Supreme Court also to display in that courtroom, should be good enough for a public school classroom.
In Texas, Paul Petit, CBN News.
And still ahead, bringing back a lost species. That story next on Faith Nation.
Finally tonight, a groundbreaking effort that reads like it's straight out of science fiction.
Yeah, a biotech company is attempting to make extinction a thing of the past, using DNA from a tooth and a skull as far back as 72,000 years. Researchers at Dallas-based Colossal Biosciences bred 3 wolves with traits similar to dire wolves, a once native North American species that went extinct thousands of years ago. The wolf pups, named Romulus, Remus, and Khaleesi, live on an ecological preserve currently weighing 80 pounds, but they're expected to reach up to 140 pounds by adulthood. They are really cute.
Super cute, maybe as pups, but not as adults.
Yeah, those teeth are going to get sharp.
That's right.
Have a great night.
Thanks for watching.
Their fur looks